Evelyn Carter had spent most of her adult life building the kind of stability she once thought was unshakable. At 67, she wasn't naive about marriage. She knew every relationship had its quiet compromises and unspoken negotiations. But she also believed, with the kind of conviction that comes from decades together, that hers was built on trust. She and her husband, Richard, had been married for 43 years. They had met in their early 20s when she was a newly minted accountant, and he was an ambitious young salesman with more charm than experience. Over the years, they had grown a small consulting business from their spare bedroom into a thriving firm that catered to corporate clients across the state. Richard was the face of the company, eloquent, charismatic, the man who could win over a room in minutes. Evelyn was the engine behind the scenes, handling the finances, managing staff schedules, keeping the wheels turning. It was a rhythm they both understood and respected, or so she thought. Lately, something had shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things. He started taking more networking dinners without inviting her, which wasn't unusual in itself. But he'd come home later than usual, smelling faintly of expensive perfume she didn't wear. He had begun keeping his phone face down during meetings, something that had never mattered before. Evelyn told herself it was nothing. People get busy, people change habits, but deep down she felt the shift like a tremor under a house that had always stood firm. The first time she really noticed the tension was 3 months before the gala. They were in their shared office going over quarterly numbers when Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and quickly slipped it into his jacket pocket without answering. "Something important?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. He hesitated, then smiled that easy smile that had won her over decades ago. "Just a client. I'll call them back." The answer wasn't unusual, but the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers stayed with her long after. At the heart of the business was their partner, Daniel Price, a man Evelyn respected. Daniel had joined their company 15 years earlier, bringing in big clients and an even bigger network. He was married to Claire, a woman Evelyn had always considered warm, if a bit aloof. Claire was the type to make an entrance at every event. Designer gowns, perfect hair, a knack for working a crowd without ever seeming rushed. Evelyn never felt threatened by her. They traveled in the same circles, but their lives were different. That winter, the company's annual gala was set to be the biggest yet. It was the firm's 20th anniversary, and Evelyn had spent weeks planning every detail: venue, guest list, the menu, even the floral arrangements. It was more than just a celebration. It was a milestone, a testament to the years she and Richard had poured into their work. Still, as the event drew closer, she noticed Richard seemed more invested in certain details than usual. Details that had nothing to do with the business. He asked twice about where Claire would be seated. He wanted to review the wine list himself, something he had never done in past years. And once, when Evelyn walked into the kitchen, she overheard him on the phone, his voice low, saying, "Yes, we'll have time. Don't worry." When he saw her, he ended the call abruptly and said it was about the sound system. Evelyn didn't confront him. Not then. A part of her wanted to believe she was imagining it. Another part, the quieter and more cautious one, decided it was better to watch and wait than to accuse without proof. The night before the gala, Richard came home later than usual, claiming he had been finalizing last-minute details with Daniel. Evelyn noticed the faint shimmer of lipstick on his collar. Not her shade. She didn't comment. Instead, she folded his tuxedo jacket and placed it neatly on the chair by the door, her hands steady despite the churn in her chest. She had spent a lifetime learning how to read balance sheets, contracts, and market shifts. Now she found herself reading the silences between them, the way his attention seemed to drift, the two quick glances at his phone. The signs were there, and Evelyn, though she hadn't yet named it, knew she was standing at the edge of something she couldn't turn away from. The gala would be the kind of night that could cement their legacy as partners, in business and in life. What she didn't know, not yet, was that it would also be the night that legacy would shatter, piece by piece, in front of a room full of people. She told herself she was ready for anything. She wasn't. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the air warm with the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. The company's 20th anniversary gala was everything Evelyn had envisioned. silver tablecloths, deep red roses, and a jazz quartet playing softly in the corner. Guests in black tie attire milled about, congratulating her and Richard on 20 years of excellence. Evelyn moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her champagne glass in hand, exchanging hugs and smiles. She was proud of the night, proud of what they had built. Yet under the surface, a tension coiled tight in her chest. Richard was somewhere in the room. She could sense his presence without seeing him. Then she spotted him. He was near the bar talking to Claire. They stood too close, their bodies angled in toward each other, Claire's hand resting lightly on his forearm in a way that looked casual. Too casual. Evelyn watched as he leaned down to say something, and Claire laughed, tipping her head back in a way that exposed her bare neck. He reached to tuck a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. The noise of the room seemed to dull, replaced by the faint rush of blood in Evelyn's ears. Daniel, Claire's husband, was across the room, chatting with a group of clients, oblivious to the scene at the bar. Evelyn's first instinct was to walk away, to busy herself with the guests, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But then Richard's hand lingered on Claire's arm, his thumb brushing against her skin. It wasn't businesslike. It wasn't even the kind of flirtation you could write off as harmless. It was intimacy, practiced and familiar. Her steps carried her forward before she had time to think. She crossed the floor with a measured calm, her heels clicking against the polished wood. By the time she reached them, they had straightened slightly, but the warmth in their faces didn't vanish quickly enough. "Richard," she said evenly. "Claire, enjoying the evening?" Claire smiled, polished, poised, the kind of smile that revealed nothing. "Oh, Evelyn, you've outdone yourself. Everything is just stunning." Richard glanced at her, his smile a shade too tight. "We were just talking about the wine selection." Her eyes didn't leave his. "Were you?" she asked softly, but with enough weight in her tone to make him blink. She took a sip of champagne, holding his gaze for a long moment before turning to Claire. "And you? Did you find the wine to your liking?" Claire hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Evelyn had spent a lifetime reading the truth in numbers, and now she was reading it in their faces. "I did," Claire said quickly, brushing an imaginary speck from her dress. "You have excellent taste." Evelyn's lips curved into a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I've been told that, about wine and other things." The words hung in the air, sharper than they seemed at first glance. Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the crowd as if looking for an escape. Daniel appeared then, smiling as he approached. "There you are, Claire. I've been looking all over for you." "Evelyn, Richard, this is quite the celebration. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for the company." Evelyn turned to Daniel, meeting his kind eyes. She felt a pang of guilt for what she knew he didn't yet see. But the moment passed quickly. If tonight was going to be the night she remembered for the rest of her life, she wanted the truth to be part of it. She set her champagne glass down on the nearest table, her voice steady but laced with something colder than she intended. "Daniel, since you're here, maybe it's time we address something I've noticed for a while. Something I think you, of all people, deserve to know." Richard's head snapped toward her. "Evelyn, not here!" But she kept going, her tone calm, deliberate, every word like a slow turn of a key in a lock that couldn't be undone. "While we've all been working to build this company, it seems some of us have been investing our time elsewhere." Very personally, Daniel frowned, looking between them. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "I'm talking about your wife, Daniel, and my husband. I'm talking about the way they've been meeting outside of business hours, the kind of meetings that don't end with contracts being signed." A ripple of silence spread across the small circle around them. Even the band seemed quieter, the notes fading into the charged air. Claire's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Richard's face was pale now, his jaw tight. Daniel looked at his wife, his expression hardening. "Is that true?" Claire's lips pressed together, her hands clutching her clutch bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. Richard stepped forward slightly, his voice low but urgent. "Evelyn, we should talk about this privately." But Evelyn didn't move. She met his eyes one last time and said, "No, we've done too much privately. Tonight, it's all in the open." The murmur in the ballroom was like the low roll of distant thunder. People avoided looking directly at her, but Evelyn could feel their eyes on her back as she stepped away from the small cluster that had just witnessed everything. She didn't rush. She walked with measured steps, her posture unshaken, though inside, every nerve felt raw and exposed. She moved toward the far side of the room, where the soft lighting dimmed near the balcony doors. The air outside was cool, and the city skyline glittered like 1,000 silent witnesses. Evelyn gripped the balcony railing, the cold metal grounding her against the chaos that churned in her chest. She told herself she had prepared for this. In truth, she hadn't. The words she'd spoken a few minutes ago had been sharp, deliberate, and necessary, but they'd also cut into her own flesh. Saying them out loud made the betrayal real in a way that her suspicions never had. Her mind replayed the small signs she had ignored. The scent of another woman's perfume on Richard's shirt, the lipstick she didn't own, the late nights, the phone calls answered in another room. All those moments she'd brushed aside with the excuse that 43 years of marriage deserved the benefit of the doubt. Now she wondered if that benefit had been a mistake. The glass door slid open behind her. She didn't turn right away. She knew who it was. "Evelyn," Richard's voice came, low and careful, the way you might speak to someone balancing on the edge of a cliff. She didn't move. "Go back inside, Richard. This is my moment to breathe." He stepped closer. "You've humiliated me in front of our clients, in front of Daniel." She turned then, the city lights catching the faint sheen in her eyes. "Humiliated you? No, Richard, I revealed you. You did the humiliating all on your own." For a moment his mouth opened as if to reply, but nothing came. He closed it again, his jaw working. "I didn't plan for it to happen like this," he said finally. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." Her laugh was short, humorless. 43 years together, and you still think you can tell me what it was supposed to mean? It meant enough for you to risk your marriage, your reputation, our business, and for what? So you could feel alive again?" He flinched, just slightly, but she saw it. "I've been there for every late night you said was work. I've covered for you when you were too tired to show up to family dinners. I believed you, Richard. I chose to believe you because I thought we were a team." Her voice trembled on that last word, but she didn't look away. The vulnerability in it wasn't weakness. It was the weight of a lifetime of trust, unraveling thread by thread. Inside, the sound of glasses clinking and low conversation carried through the glass. Somewhere, Daniel was probably confronting Claire, and Evelyn pictured the hurt on his face. It twisted in her gut, not because she wanted to shield him from it, but because she understood it so well. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Richard said, softer now, almost pleading. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You didn't mean to get caught. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The city's distant hum filled the silence between them. She realized she was gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles ached. She loosened her hold, inhaling deeply. "I can't do this with you right now," she said finally, her tone steadier than she felt. "Go inside. Finish your schmoozing, shake the hands you need to shake. But after tonight, you and I have nothing to discuss until I've decided what my next step is." Richard hesitated, then gave a small nod. He turned without another word, slipping back into the golden glow of the ballroom. Evelyn stayed on the balcony, letting the cold air wash over her. Beneath the initial sting of betrayal, a different emotion began to stir. Not rage, not despair, but clarity. She realized she wasn't simply reacting anymore. She was observing, deciding. She had been blindsided tonight, but she wouldn't stay in that position for long. Inside, laughter rose from a table near the bar, oblivious to the fractures spreading through the lives of the people at its center. Evelyn straightened her shoulders, took one last deep breath, and stepped back into the room. She moved toward the exit without stopping for goodbyes. Not because she was running away, but because she was walking toward the space she needed to plan her next move. Tonight, she had exposed the truth. Tomorrow, she would decide what to do with it. The following morning, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling beside her. The house was unnervingly quiet. No low hum of the radio Richard usually played while making breakfast. No clink of dishes. She had woken before dawn, unable to sleep, her mind replaying the previous night's scene again and again, like a film reel she couldn't stop. By the time Richard came downstairs, she had already decided she wouldn't be the one to break the silence. He entered slowly, wearing a freshly pressed shirt, his hair combed, as if presenting a version of himself untouched by the night before. But his face betrayed him, tired eyes, a stiffness in his movements. "Morning," he said cautiously, pulling out the chair across from her. Evelyn didn't look up from her coffee. "Morning." He sat, leaning forward, his hands clasped on the table. "About last night," she raised her eyes, steady and unreadable. "Yes, let's talk about last night." Richard hesitated as though weighing his words. It wasn't what it looked like. The corner of her mouth twitched, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "Richard, do you really think that's going to work on me after 43 years? You were standing too close, touching her like—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "Number I saw enough, and I've seen enough over the last few months to know last night wasn't an isolated moment." He leaned back, exhaling. "It started— I don't know, Evelyn. I was feeling—" "Don't!" she cut in sharply. "Don't you dare start this with 'I was feeling.' I know exactly what you were feeling. You wanted attention, validation, whatever thrill you think you've been missing. And instead of talking to me, your wife, you went looking for it with Claire, our business partner's wife." Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words pressed hard into the air between them. Richard's gaze dropped to the table. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could manage it, keep it separate. I care about you, Evelyn. That hasn't changed." She let out a slow breath, as if steadying herself against the sting of those words. "You care about me. You care so much you risked our marriage and our company. You care so much you've been lying to me, lying to Daniel, lying to yourself." He ran a hand over his face. "I made a mistake." "Mistake?" Her voice was icy now. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or missing a dinner reservation. This was a choice. Repeated choices. Every time you called her, met her, touched her, you made the decision to betray me." Richard flinched, but he didn't argue. Evelyn's eyes held his, unblinking. "I need you to understand something. I will not be gaslit into thinking I imagined this. I will not let you dress it up as something harmless. And I will not stand by while you try to patch over this with words you think I want to hear. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now," he said quietly. I don't want to lose you." Her laugh was bitter. "You already did, Richard. You just haven't realized it yet." They sat in silence for several moments, the tick of the kitchen clock punctuating the stillness. Evelyn's thoughts turned briefly to Daniel, whether Claire had confessed, whether he knew the whole truth yet. She wondered if his mourning felt as heavy as hers. Richard finally broke the quiet. "I'll end it. I'll talk to Claire, make sure it's over. We can move past this." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "You think this is about Claire? This is about you. Ending it with her doesn't undo the fact that you broke something in me. Something I don't think you can fix." He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised a hand. "No more. I've heard enough for now." She stood, gathering her coffee mug and rinsing it at the sink. "You'll be staying in the guest room until I decide my next move. We're still partners in the company, for now. But at home, we are separate. Do you understand me?" Richard nodded reluctantly, the weight of her words settling on him. Evelyn didn't look at him again as she walked out of the kitchen. She didn't need to. She had said what she needed to say. The next steps would be hers alone to choose. For the first time since the night before, she felt the faintest thread of control returning to her hands. 2 days later, Evelyn sat in her home office, sunlight spilling across the desk piled with folders and contracts. The house was quiet except for the low hum of her computer. Richard had left early for meetings at the office, though she no longer cared to ask with whom or where. She stared at the company's quarterly reports on the screen, but her mind wasn't on the numbers. She was thinking about the business in a way she hadn't in years. Not as something they shared, but as something she had built, something she could protect. The betrayal had stripped away the last illusions. Richard wasn't just a husband who had made a devastating personal choice. He was a business partner who had entangled their company's future with his recklessness. If the affair became public knowledge, and after the gala scene, that was almost inevitable, it could tarnish their professional reputation, damage client trust, and give Daniel legal grounds to walk away from their partnership. Evelyn had spent her career avoiding rash decisions, but this time, waiting quietly in the background wasn't an option. She picked up the phone and called her attorney, a woman named Marianne she had known for over a decade. They had met years earlier when Marianne handled a complex vendor dispute for the company, and Evelyn trusted her to navigate delicate situations. "I need to discuss both personal and business matters," Evelyn said as soon as Marianne answered. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "And I need to know my options before I take my next step." Marianne didn't ask for details over the phone. "Come in this afternoon," she said. "We'll go through everything. Bring the company's operating agreement and any recent financial statements." When Evelyn hung up, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet, resolute click, like a lock being turned. She wasn't merely reacting anymore. She was planning. By 3 o'clock, she was sitting in Marianne's office, a neat stack of documents on the table between them. She laid out the events of the last week, her suspicions, the Gala confrontation, Richard's justifications, the possible fallout with Daniel. Marianne listened intently, taking notes. When Evelyn finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You have two separate but connected issues here, your marriage and your business. They overlap because you and Richard share ownership. If you divorce, we'll need to address the division of assets, which will include his share of the company. But given the circumstances, we can also look at restructuring to protect your interests now, before anything escalates." Evelyn nodded. "What about the partnership with Daniel? If he leaves because of this, the company could take a huge hit." "That's why you need to talk to him," Marianne said. "Soon, preferably before Richard spins his own version of events." The thought of that conversation made Evelyn's stomach tighten, but she knew it had to be done. They spent the next hour outlining a plan. On the personal front, Marianne would begin preparing the groundwork for a potential divorce filing, giving Evelyn time to decide without rushing. On the business side, they would review the operating agreement to see if Richard's conduct could be considered grounds for removal, or at least a buyout of his shares. When Evelyn left the office, the winter air felt sharper, almost invigorating. She drove directly to the company headquarters, her fingers tapping against the steering wheel. Daniel deserved to hear from her first, before gossip or Richard's excuses reached him. Daniel was in his office when she arrived, his expression guarded. "I was wondering when you'd come by," he said. Evelyn closed the door behind her and sat down across from him. "I owe you the truth, Daniel, about what's been going on between Richard and Claire." His jaw tightened. "I already confronted her. She admitted enough." He looked away for a moment, then back at her. "But I want to hear your side." She told him everything, how she'd noticed the changes in Richard's behavior, how she'd confronted them both at the gala, how Richard had tried to downplay it. She didn't embellish or dramatize, she gave him the facts. When she finished, Daniel let out a long breath. "This puts us in a hell of a position. Clients talk. If this gets out—" "I know," she said. "That's why I'm coming to you now. I want to make sure we protect the business, no matter what happens between Richard and me." For the first time since she'd entered, Daniel's expression softened. "You've always been the steady one, Evelyn. I appreciate that you're thinking about the company in the middle of all this." They agreed to review the partnership terms together and meet, with legal counsel if necessary. It wasn't an emotional resolution. It was a strategic one. And for Evelyn, that was exactly what she needed right now. Steps forward that were clear, deliberate, and within her control. As she left the building that evening, she realized something important. Richard's betrayal had taken their marriage, but it wouldn't take the business she had poured her life into. That she could still protect. The opportunity for the final confrontation came sooner than Evelyn expected. 2 weeks after the gala, the company hosted a private dinner for a small group of high-value clients, a chance to smooth over any whispers from that night. Daniel had agreed to attend, but only after confirming with Evelyn that Richard would be kept on a short leash. Evelyn didn't promise him anything about Richard's behavior, but she did promise one thing: she would handle it. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant with a glass-walled private dining room overlooking the city. The table was set with pristine white linens, flickering candles, and polished silverware. Clients trickled in, greeting Evelyn warmly. Richard arrived last, looking sharp in a dark suit, his charm dialed to full as he worked the room. Evelyn kept her composure, answering client questions, making introductions. But when she caught sight of Claire slipping quietly through the door a half hour into the dinner, something in her stilled. She hadn't been invited. Evelyn had made sure of that. Yet there she was, wearing a deep emerald dress in a smirk that made Evelyn's jaw tighten. Claire moved straight toward Richard, touching his arm as she leaned in to whisper something. Evelyn noticed the way his posture shifted, a quick spark of familiarity in his eyes. And she noticed Daniel, watching from across the room, his expression flat but tense. This was the moment. Evelyn rose from her seat and tapped her glass lightly. The chatter in the room quieted, the clinking of cutlery fading. "I'd like to take a moment," she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "to thank everyone for being here tonight. Our company has always prided itself on transparency, integrity, and mutual respect, not just with our clients, but among our partners." She let her gaze sweep the table, pausing briefly on Richard, then on Claire. "Unfortunately, I've learned recently that not everyone at this table shares those values." A ripple moved through the guests, subtle but unmistakable. Richard straightened, his smile tightening. "Evelyn," she held up a hand, cutting him off without raising her voice. "No, Richard, you've had plenty of time to speak behind closed doors. Tonight, I'm speaking in the open." Her attention shifted to the clients, her tone still even, but with a bite beneath the politeness. "Over the past months, I discovered that my husband and business partner has been engaged in an inappropriate relationship with the wife of our other partner, Daniel Price. Not only is this a personal betrayal, it's a breach of the trust on which our business is built." The air in the room seemed to contract. Claire's smirk faltered. Her hand dropped from Richard's arm. "I'm telling you this," Evelyn continued, "because you deserve to know the kind of people you're doing business with, and because I refuse to allow my silence to be mistaken for complicity." Richard's face had gone pale, but his voice was low and urgent. "This isn't the time or place." "This is exactly the time and place," Evelyn said, her tone sharpening just enough to make the candles flicker in the silence. "You've blurred the lines between our marriage and our company. I'm here to draw them back." She turned toward Daniel, meeting his eyes. "I've already spoken to my attorney about restructuring ownership. Richard's shares will be bought out. The company will remain stable, because I will make sure it does. But his time as both my partner and yours is over." Daniel nodded once, slowly, his expression unreadable, but resolute. Evelyn faced the table again. "To our clients, your contracts, your projects, your trust, none of it will be compromised. If anything, this is a promise that I will safeguard it even more fiercely than before." The room was silent for a beat before a few polite, almost tentative nods rippled through the guests. The discomfort was palpable, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Richard sat frozen, his fork untouched, his usual arsenal of charm and quick wit nowhere to be found. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the sheen of confidence gone from her posture. Evelyn picked up her wine glass, her hand steady. "Now," she said lightly but with finality, "let's enjoy dinner." The conversations that followed were awkward, stilted, but Evelyn didn't care. She'd said what needed to be said in front of the people who mattered most to the company's future. There would be no quiet sweeping under the rug, no whispered negotiations behind closed doors. When the dinner ended, Richard avoided her gaze as he left with Claire trailing a step behind him. Evelyn didn't watch them go. She stayed to shake hands with clients, reassure them, and stand alongside Daniel as an equal, not as someone's wife holding back the truth. That night, for the first time in weeks, Evelyn slept without waking in the dark, her mind chasing questions. The lines had been drawn. The end was in motion. The legal process moved faster than Evelyn expected, not because Richard cooperated, but because she had come armed with preparation and resolve. Within a week of the dinner, Marianne had filed the paperwork for divorce and initiated proceedings to buy out Richard's shares in the company. Daniel, still reeling from Claire's betrayal, agreed to back Evelyn fully, both financially and strategically. He wanted Claire gone from his life as much as Evelyn wanted Richard gone from hers. Richard's initial reaction was predictably defensive. He balked at the valuation Marianne's team presented, argued over percentages, and sent Evelyn a flurry of emails late at night filled with both pleas for reconciliation and threats to fight this all the way. Evelyn didn't respond to a single one. Every communication went through Marianne. When Richard tried to call her directly, she let the phone ring. She wasn't being petty, she was being deliberate. The man who had once been her partner in every sense was now simply an opposing party in two separate but intertwined legal battles, and she treated him accordingly. Her focus was on securing her future. Marianne had explained that if they acted quickly and decisively, they could protect the company's standing and keep most of the clients from jumping ship. That meant holding firm during negotiations and refusing to be intimidated by Richard's bluster. The first settlement meeting was in a neutral conference room downtown. Richard arrived looking tired, the lines in his face deeper than she remembered. For a moment, seeing him like that almost softened her resolve. But then she remembered the way his hand had rested on Claire's arm at the gala, the quick turn of his smile when he thought no one was watching. She sat across from him, calm and collected, letting Marianne do the talking. Richard's lawyer pushed for a higher buyout number, citing his role in building the company. Marianne countered with evidence of his recent conduct harming the company's reputation, as well as internal financial records showing Evelyn had shouldered the bulk of the operational responsibilities for years. By the end of the meeting, Richard's lawyer had shifted from aggressive posturing to discussing payment schedules. Richard himself barely met her eyes. 2 more weeks passed before the agreements were signed. Richard's shares were officially transferred to Evelyn, leaving her as the primary owner alongside Daniel. The divorce decree was finalized the same day. When the judge read the final ruling, Evelyn felt no triumph, no rush of gloating satisfaction, only a deep, quiet relief. It was over. That evening, she and Daniel met in the office to sign the updated partnership documents. The company's future was secure, and for the first time in months, Evelyn allowed herself to think about what came next. Not in terms of damage control, but in terms of building something better. "You handled all of this with more dignity than most people could have managed," Daniel told her as they finished signing. Evelyn smiled faintly. It didn't feel dignified some days, it just felt necessary. They toasted with a pair of crystal tumblers Daniel kept in his office, the amber liquid catching the light. The next morning she arrived at work early. The office was quiet, the sun spilling through the tall windows. She stood in the center of the lobby. For a moment, just looking around. The place felt different now, not weighed down by Richard's shadow, not tinged with the unspoken tension that had lingered for months. Later that day, she called a staff meeting. Standing at the head of the table, she addressed her employees, some of whom had heard rumors, others who had simply noticed the shifts in leadership. "I want to thank you all for your hard work and loyalty through what has been a challenging time for this company," she began. "Moving forward, we will continue to hold ourselves to the highest standard, not just in the work we do, but in how we conduct ourselves. Integrity will not be optional here. It will be the foundation of everything." There was a round of quiet nods, some murmurs of agreement. Evelyn met the eyes of each person in the room. She wanted them to see her not as someone who had been wronged, but as someone who had taken control. When the meeting ended, she returned to her office and closed the door. She allowed herself one deep exhale, the kind that clears not just the lungs, but something deeper. The justice she'd sought wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming what was hers, her dignity, her work, her future, and she had done exactly that. 3 months later, Evelyn's life looked nothing like it had before. The big house was gone, replaced by a bright, 2-bedroom condo downtown. Smaller, quieter, and entirely hers. Every object in it was something she had chosen. No compromises, no reminders of the life she'd left behind. The company was thriving. With Richard gone, decisions came easier, and Daniel had proven himself a steady, dependable partner. Clients who had once seemed wary were now praising the firm's renewed focus. Evelyn stood on her balcony one crisp morning, a mug of coffee warming her hands. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marianne. Last settlement payment from Richard cleared. You're officially free. She smiled faintly. Officially free. The words felt heavier and lighter all at once. The memory of the gala still came to her sometimes. The shock, the sting, but it no longer sat in her chest like a stone. It was part of her story, not the whole of it. She had moved through it, not around it. Later that morning, her daughter Melissa stopped by with pastries. Over breakfast, Melissa studied her and said, "You seem lighter." "I am," Evelyn said simply. "I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until I let it go." Melissa squeezed her hand. "You deserve this peace, Mom." When Melissa left, Evelyn took the long way to work. She passed a park where early joggers circled, children played on swings, and sunlight cut through the bare branches. She paused for a moment, breathing in the stillness. The world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt more open than it had in years. By the time she reached the office, she was ready, not just for another day of work, but for whatever came next. She unlocked the glass doors and stepped inside, knowing this space, this future, was entirely hers. And for the first time in a long time, she felt not like a woman defined by what she'd lost, but by everything she had reclaimed.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.